Today in the Daily Dose, the history of China. The Shang Dynasty. The earliest written records in Chinese history date back to the Shang Dynasty, which according to legend began when a tribal chief named Tang defeated the Xia Dynasty, which in 1600 BC was under the control of a cruel tyrant named Jia. Jia's downfall came at the Battle of Mingtao, which was fought during a thunderstorm, and while Jia survived the battle, he later died from illness. Thanks to inscriptions unearthed on tortoise shells, people of the ensuing Shang Dynasty used calendars and developed knowledge of astronomy and math. The Shang calendar was at first lunar-based, but a solar-based version was developed by a man named Wan Yin, who was the first to create a 365-day year through his observations of the summer and winter solstices. Shang Dynasty artisans created sophisticated bronze works, as well as ceramics and jade trinkets. Chinese characters first appeared during the Shang Dynasty, inscribed on cattle bones, and archaeologists have uncovered evidence of two numerological systems, one based on numbers from 1 to 10, and another based on numbers from 1 to 12. During the Shang Dynasty, there were several large settlements, including Zhengzhou and Anyang, although they were not. Genghis Khan. Born into abject poverty around 1162, near the Mongolian and Siberian border, Genghis Khan, originally named Temujin, rose to power by avoiding placing relatives in key leadership positions, while executing the leaders of enemy tribes before assimilating surrendering lay people into his growing sphere of influence. Although Khan was an animist, his belief in religious freedom saw Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists follow him into battle. By 1206, Genghis Khan, which translates to universal ruler, had established a nation similar in size to modern Mongolia. By the time Genghis Khan united the Mongolian steppe tribes, he now ruled over more than 1 million people, at the same time abolishing all inherited aristocratic titles. Despite the ruthlessness of his invading Mongol armies, he forbade the selling and kidnapping of women, banned the enslavement of any Mongol tribesman, while making theft of livestock punishable by death. Khan also ushered in the adoption of a writing system, while granting diplomatic immunity to foreign ambassadors. Beginning in 1209 until his death in 1227, Khan and his Mongol armies pushed beyond the borders of Mongolia, traveling without a supply train other than a large reserve of spare horses. After invading most of modern-day China, by 1219, Khan went to war against the Khwarezm Empire, which encompassed the geography of present-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Iran, slaughtering and plundering his way through city after city, including Bukhara, Samarkand, and Gench. Skilled workers such as carpenters were generally spared, while aristocrats and enemy soldiers were killed on the spot. No one knows with any certainty how many people perished during Khan's endless years of conquest, but by his return to Mongolia in 1227, his empire comprised an enormous swath of territory from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. By the time of his death on August 18, 1227, caused by internal injuries after falling from a horse during battle, Genghis Khan conquered more than twice as much geography than any other person in history, at the same time bringing Eastern and Western civilizations into contact with one another for one of the first times in history. Trained by Khan himself, his immediate descendants would follow in his footsteps, conquering Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the remainder of China, even invading Japan and Java, before the Mongol Empire slowly broke apart in the 14th century, making Genghis Khan one of the greatest military minds in the history of human conquest. The Zhou Dynasty. Divided into two periods, the Western Zhou from 1046 to 771 BC, and the Eastern Zhou from 771 to 256 BC. The Zhou dynasty followed the Shang dynasty, although both shared many cultural and religious similarities in their use of ritualistic bronze vessels and the practice of divination during the Bronze Age. Borrowing the Shang dynasty's concept of the mandate of heaven, which was the belief that a king was divinely appointed by God, the dynasty's founding ruler, King Wu, at first established a centralized government shortly before his death, prompting Wu's brother Dan, the Duke of Zhou, to act as regent until Wu's young son Chang was old enough to rule. Writing the now famous I Ching, the poet-warrior Duke established a decentralized state based on a social hierarchy similar to European feudalism, which prospered despite a steady rise of rebellious noble factions near the end of the Western period, each wishing to rule for themselves. Collapsing just before an era known as the Spring and Autumn period, which saw notable advances in music, poetry, and philosophy, the early Eastern period witnessed the development of the Confucian, legalist, Moist, and Taoist schools of thought. Moving the capital to Luoyang, the period also saw notable advances in agriculture, education, military organization, Chinese literature and music, as well as political innovations that would lay the foundation for the Qin dynasty to come. Many famous Chinese writers lived during the Eastern period at a time known as the 100 Schools of Thought, including Mencius, Moiti, Lao Tzu, and Sun Tzu. Facing an ever-increasing breakdown of the imperial Chinese government, leading many to claim that Zhou rulers had lost the mandate of heaven, monarchical weaknesses gave rise to the Warring States period from 481 to 221 BC, when the 7 separate states of China fought one another for hegemony, ending the Zhou dynasty when the state of Qin proved victorious in battle. The incoming Qin dynasty rulers soon erased the Zhou's accomplishments to ensure their own primacy, making the 800-year Zhou dynasty the longest continuous dynastic reign in China's now 3,600-year history. The Qin dynasty. Ending the Warring States period in 221 BC China, Qin Emperor Yingzhang took the name Qin Shi Huang, a merging of the words mythical ruler and god, conquering all of the Zhou dynasty states to become the first solitary emperor of China. Traveling in secrecy through a system of tunnels and clandestine residences, Qin Shi Huang created a standardized, non-alphabetic written script which enabled Chinese of differing cultures and languages to communicate, at the same time standardizing weights, measurements, and currency that streamlined trade and commerce across his vast and flourishing empire. In a dynasty marked by engineering marvels, Qin Shi Huang built a unifying network of some 4,000 miles of roads, including a 500-mile superhighway to the Zhu mountain range, which transported some 300,000 workers and supplies for the construction of the Great Wall of China, which would eventually span 13,000 miles from snow-covered mountains in the west to the Yellow Sea. Now known for his audacious works of art and architecture, Qin Shi Huang melted down weapons collected during his many conquests to cast giant statues for his capital city of Shenyang, before sending some 700,000 workers to create his massive underground tomb in the Lishan Mountains. Although never entered due to Qin Shi Huang's use of toxic mercury for his underground rivers, archaeological surveys and magnetic imaging reveals an underground mausoleum surrounded by a wall measuring 1,500 by 1,300 feet, protecting a tomb guarded by bronze chariots and horses. The site also includes a complex of temples, chambers, and administrative buildings, each adorned by terracotta statues of acrobats and government officials. Discovered by farmers in 1974, Qin Shi Huang protected his afterlife residence with some 8,000 terracotta warriors and over 600 terracotta horses and chariots. And while only 2,000 have been unearthed through painstaking archaeological excavations, each warrior is unique in appearance and once painted in elaborate colors. After his death in 210 BC, officials installed Qin Shi Huang's younger son as the new emperor, which led to a string of rebellions to his rule. After warlord Shang Yu defeated the Qin army in battle, dividing the empire into 18 states, Liu Bang assumed the throne at the onset of the Han Dynasty, making the Qin Dynasty one of the shortest unifying reigns in China's 3,600-year history. The Han Dynasty. Following a mass revolt in 210 BC, which ended the Qin Empire, following a brief control period by warlord Zhang Yu, Liu Bang became the first Han Dynasty emperor in 202 BC, renaming himself Gaozu while establishing the Han capital at Chang'an along the Wei River. Gaozu replaced many of the ancient Chinese kings with members of his own family to quell rebellions and insurrections. However, the move would prove to be a struggle against the ambitions of his own family members. Following Gaozu's death in 195 BC, Empress Lu Zai seized power by murdering several of Gaozu's sons, including the murder and mutilation of Gaozu's favorite mistress, Lady Kai, before tossing her body into a privy and showing it off to France. The power struggle ended 15 years later, when Gaozu's son, Emperor Wan, slaughtered Lu Zai and her entire bloodline. Confucianism became favored by Han royalty around 135 BC, during the reign of Emperor Wu, which had been kept alive during Confucianism's lost years due to intellectuals like Fu Shang, who saved important Confucian literature during the civil wars that ended the Qin dynasty. In 138 BC, a man named Zhang Jia was sent on a 13-year trip by Emperor Wu to make contact with Western tribes, finally reaching Afghanistan in an area known as Bactria, which was then under Greek control. In Bactria, he saw bamboo and silk textiles brought in from China, and when he learned about the overland route the traders had taken, he took the news back to Emperor Wu, which would quickly become known as the now legendary Silk Road trading route. While the Han Dynasty would also see the birth of paper and many advances in writing and art, the Han Dynasty's predilection for courtly intrigue eventually brought it down. Scuffles broke out between the Empress Dowager's family and the eunuchs at court, following a coup attempt by a religious cult known as the Yellow Turbans. And as the situation continued to unravel, the military took control of the conflicts until 220 AD, when the last Han emperor was dethroned and the dynasty finished, ushering in the Sixth Dynasty period that would flourish from 220 AD until 589 AD. The Silk Road to China. The Silk Road, or Silk Routes as historians now refer to the multiple thoroughfares beginning in Greece and ending in the Chinese interior. The Silk Road routes included an enormous matrix of trading posts and markets, intended to expedite the distribution and storage of goods. From the Greco-Roman city of Antioch, one of the primary routes crossed the Syrian desert through Palmyra to Ctesiphon and Seleucia on the Tigris River, which were Mesopotamian cities in present-day Iraq. From Seleucia, multiple routes traveled eastward over the Zagros Mountains into Iran and Turkmenistan, while additional routes transited Afghanistan into Mongolia and China. Still other routes led to ports along the Persian Gulf, where goods were transferred from camels to boats for transit up the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, allowing goods to flow across the Roman Empire and deeper into Europe. While the Silk Road derives its name from the popularity of Chinese silks in the Roman Empire and Western Europe, other heavily traded goods included vegetables, livestock, grain, leather, precious stones, and countless more. Yet less tangible commodities included the free exchange of languages, cultures, religious beliefs, philosophy, and science. Invented in China during the Han Dynasty, the diffusion of paper technology resulted in a profound and lasting impact on the culture and history of Western civilization, paving the way for the Gutenberg printing press, which led to the mass production of books and later newspapers, helping to further the exchange of news, ideas, and information. Another Han Dynasty invention was gunpowder, whose impact on warfare and world history equaled the invention of paper. Spices were another commodity that gained rapid popularity, forever altering the flavors and cuisine enjoyed by Europeans. Lasting from 130 BCE until the Ottoman Empire banned trade with China in 1453, Venetian explorer Marco Polo made 2 trips along the Silk Road from Italy to China, first in 1269, when the 15-year-old accompanied his father and uncle for a meeting with Yuan Emperor Kublai Khan, who requested that the traders bring back oil from the lamp of Jerusalem, as well as a written request to the Pope in Rome, seeking 100 Christians acquainted with the 7 arts, which comprise grammar, rhetoric, logic, geometry, arithmetic, music, and astronomy. Despite the Silk Road's obvious link to the trade of Chinese silks, the term Silk Road wasn't coined until 1877, when German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen first used the phrase to describe the legendary trade routes into China, making the Silk Road one of the earliest superhighways in human history. The Sui Dynasty. Seizing power after 3 centuries of warring states and Chinese disunity, in 581 AD, military leader Yang Qian seized control of the north from his base in Guangzhou, declaring himself regent a year later, after murdering 59 members of the royal Zhou family to squash the chance of a Zhou dynasty comeback. Amassing an army of over 500,000 soldiers and a massive fleet of 5-deck ships capable of carrying 800 men each, by 589, Yang Qian had proven victorious over the southern states of China, unifying the country for the second time in the nation's history. Soon known as Emperor Wendi, the new ruler called his dynasty Sui after his father, before improving his centralized government with a civil service exam based on merit, which went far in reducing local corruption. When Wendi passed away in 501 AD, his son Yangdi became the second emperor of the short-lived Sui dynasty, further simplifying China's legal code while extending the equal field system in agriculture, which better ensured that small farmers were protected from large estate owners hungry to acquire peasant farms, as well as a system of grain reserves that ensured the survival of destitute farmers in times of poor harvests and natural disasters. Conscripting thousands of workers to build 3 massive canals, including the Grand Canal that joined the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers. Yangtze's canals helped to further unify trade between the North and the South, while critics would later say that the immoral ruler simply wanted a way to travel on his royal barge, which was pulled along by hundreds of beautiful young women. Spending lavishly on palaces in each of his 3 capital cities, including a harem of thousands within his Maze Pavilion pleasure palace, Yangdi added further defenses to the Great Wall to ward off attacks by the Eastern Turks, while expanding his own territory by invading Vietnam, and other parts of Southeast Asia. His downfall came after his 5 failed invasion attempts of present-day Korea, including a third campaign of more than 300,000 soldiers, which took the lives of all but 2,700 who were lucky enough to return home in defeat. Peasant rebellions were to follow from 613 to 617, leading to his assassination by the son of one of his generals, which ushered in the Tang dynasty to follow, making the Sui dynasty the second shortest reign in China's 3,600-year history. The Tang dynasty. Considered a golden age in Chinese history, the Tang dynasty of 618 to 907 AD witnessed an intense period of government reform and cultural advances that can still be felt in China to this day. Nurtured by a series of strong and open-minded emperors, including the dynasty's second emperor Taizong, who allowed Confucian scholars with no family connection to work their way up in government. He also initiated changes to social structure, education, and the military, followed by his son Jaezong, whose wife Wu Zetian ruled China after Jaezong suffered a stroke, becoming the only female empress in China's 3,600-year history. Under the reign of Wu's successor, Xuanzang, China became the most prosperous country in the world, witnessing impressive innovations and advances, including gunpowder, gas stoves, air conditioning, and block printing, not to mention great leaps forward in music, poetry and literature, medicine, science, and architecture, as well as a welcoming embrace for Tantric Buddhism and Taoism that helped spread both religions throughout the Asian continent. After his death in 756 AD, the Tang dynasty would continue for another 151 years, yet never as illustrious and golden as the early years of the dynasty. By 820 AD, the Tang dynasty had bogged down in one palace intrigue after the next, marked by plotting eunuch officials who assassinated a string of Tang emperors. In an effort to staunch eunuch-inspired intrigues, in 835, Emperor Wenzong conspired with his chancellor and generals in a cleansing spree later known as the Sweet Dew Incident, which led to the murders of over 1,000 government officials, as well as the public execution of 3 top ministers and their families. As the country devolved into civil unrest, with roving gangs robbing merchants and murdering city dwellers at random, Huang Chao took control of the country, slaughtering 3,000 poets after a solitary poem criticized his regime. The Tang dynasty ended when Chu Wen proclaimed himself Emperor Taizo, leading to 50 years of short-lived rulers known as the Five Dynasties, making the early Tang dynasty a watershed period in Chinese history. The Song Dynasty. After the collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907 AD, a period of immense upheaval descended upon China under a string of failed kingdoms and attempted power grabs, until General Zhou Kunyin established the Song dynasty in 960 AD. Ruling under the name of Emperor Taizo, the Northern Song dynasty reigned from 960 to 1126, ushering in a period of economic, cultural, and artistic stability, including technological advances in agriculture, ironworking, and printing. The Song dynasty also witnessed a population explosion in most major cities, while government civil service positions were based on a system of meritocracy rather than nepotism or cronyism. The period also saw the establishment of an imperial painting academy, which shunned descriptive realism in exchange for spontaneity and a form of brushwork informed by the study of calligraphy. The period also witnessed a distinctive style in ceramics, which made Song dynasty vases and tea bowls a much coveted commodity in China and abroad. The period also saw rice and tea replace wheat, millet, and wine as the nation's dietary staple, while the now iconic upturned rooflines appeared in architecture for the first time in Chinese history. Despite the dynasty's myriad successes, the empire lacked military strength proportionate to the most affluent nation on the planet at the time, relying instead on annual financial gifts to neighboring states to keep the peace, until the semi-nomadic Jurchens succeeded in capturing the capital city of Kaifang in 1126, forcing royals to establish the geographically smaller Southern Song dynasty in present-day Hangzhou. The dynasty's continued military weakness remained a disturbing concern for Chinese intellectuals of the period, who responded by turning inward as they shunned foreign ideas such as Buddhism, instead embracing the native philosophies of Confucianism and Taoism, as well as a palpable revival in Chinese ancient culture, now known as the Age of Proto-Archaeology, making the Song dynasty a period of relative peace and prosperity in China's 3,600-year history. Kublai Khan. Born in 1215 into a nomadic Mongol clan living on the Mongolian Manchurian steppe, Kublai Khan was a grandson of Genghis Khan, who had expanded his empire from the Caspian Sea in the west to the Yellow and South Seas in the east, before capturing present-day Beijing during Kublai Khan's first year of life. Educated in the art of warfare, as well as Mongolian reading and writing, Chinese philosophy and culture, at age 17, Kublai Khan was granted a fiefdom of some 10,000 households in the Hubei province of China, until his eldest brother Meng Khan named Kublai Viceroy of northern China in 1252, with orders to attack the Hunan province, with the goal of capturing the Dali kingdom. Preparing for a year, Kublai Khan spent the following 3 years battling the Dali, until his victory in 1256, when he established a new northern capital at Chengdu, which would soon be misinterpreted by European traders as Xanadu. After Meng died in battle against Song defenders in 1259, a civil war broke out between supporters of Meng's younger brother Erik Bik and those in favor of Kublai Khan, which eventually ended in Bik's surrender in 1264, giving Kublai the title of the Great Khan. Establishing his capital in present-day Beijing with the goal of unifying China under one kingdom, Kublai Khan had conquered the last Song loyalist by 1279, becoming the first foreigner to rule China in his proclaimed Yuan dynasty. Considered by most scholars to be a relatively wise and benevolent ruler, Kublai Khan undertook vast infrastructure improvements, including extensions to the Grand Canal and a more efficient postal system, at the same time promoting religious tolerance and scientific advancement. On the downside, however, Kublai Khan abandoned the Song dynasty's long tradition of hiring civil servants based on merit rather than nepotism or cronyism, establishing a class system that placed Mongols on top, followed by Central Asians and Northern and Southern Chinese at the bottom, where they were heavily taxed to pay for Kublai Khan's failed military invasion attempts against Japan, Burma, and Vietnam. After his death in 1294, a devastating progression of famines, plagues, and flooding along the Yellow River led to hyperinflation and widespread rebellion after government officials flooded the Chinese economy with too much worthless paper money, leading to the Red Turban Rebellion and the ascension of the Ming Dynasty, making Kublai Khan the first successful foreign emperor of mainland China. The Yuan Dynasty. After centuries of repelling invasion attempts by nomadic Mongol leaders such as Genghis Khan and Meng Khan, Kublai Khan crushed Song dynasty defenders before establishing the Yuan dynasty in 1279 AD, becoming the first foreign leader to rule over the full expanse of China. Inexperienced at running such a vast and complex empire, Yuan dynasty leaders gradually adopted many cultural and bureaucratic models long existed in China, although a succession of natural disasters and runaway corruption fractionalized the Yuan dynasty court during its 89-year reign. Abandoning the Song dynasty's long tradition of hiring civil servants based on merit rather than nepotism or cronyism, Chinese creatives and scholar officials withdrew from public life, spawning a period of intense artistic advances and new forms of expression that helped to define the period, including fundamental stylistic changes to Chinese painting, as well as the widespread introduction of blue and white decorated porcelain through the use of cobalt oxide. Re-establishing long-forgotten land and sea trade routes to the outside world, foreign goods and ideas flowed into the coastal cities of China, spawning innovations in lacquer furniture manufacturing, while the city of Jingzhen became the thriving center of porcelain manufacturing and trade. After multiple failed attacks by Kublai Khan to invade Japan and Southeast Asia, following his death in 1294, Kublai Khan was succeeded by his grandson Timur-Iljitu, followed by a string of short-lived rulers beset by a devastating progression of famines, plagues, and flooding along the Yellow River, resulting in hyperinflation and widespread rebellion after government officials flooded the Chinese economy with too much worthless paper money. As looting and uprisings ravaged the nation, the Red Turban movement, under the peasant leadership of Zhu Yuanzhan, replaced the Buddhist White Lotus movement's desire to reinstate Song dynasty policies with his own anti-Confucian policies, eventually seizing power over the entirety of China before founding the Ming dynasty in 1368 under the name of Emperor Hongwu, making the Yuan dynasty a short yet impactful period in China's 3,600-year history. The Red Turban Rebellion. After thousands of years spent warding off invasion attempts by Mongol tribes from the north, including a 2,500-year construction project, now known as the Great Wall of China, during the late 12th and early 13th centuries, Genghis Khan unified the tribes of Mongolia, pressing down upon China until Beijing fell in 1215. His son Kublai Khan would complete the conquest of China by 1279, establishing the Yuan dynasty, which severely segregated the Han Chinese majority into a life of repression and mass deprivation. Appointing Mongols to top government positions, Han Chinese were not allowed to possess firearms or intermarry among the three groups of Mongols in control, and after Kublai Khan's death in 1294, conditions worsened under a string of incompetent emperors from 1320 to 1329. Due to the overwhelming expense of maintaining military control over such a vast empire, additional taxation fell mostly on the Han, who constituted the bottom rung of Yuan's social structure. Rampant inflation was to follow, combining forces with a string of famines and constant flooding along the Yellow River, leading to the rise of a secret society of Han peasants known as the Red Turbans or Red Scarves, whose goal was to overthrow the Mongols and return the Song dynasty to power. Founding their ideology around elements of the Buddhist White Lotus sect, along with Manichaeism, Confucianism, and Taoism, the Red Turban Rebellion began sporadically along the coast of Zhejiang, gaining momentum and widespread support under the charismatic and messianic leadership of Buddhist mendicant Zhu Yuanzhang in 1352, whose Red Turban army would successfully take the city of Nanking in 1356. Announcing his intention to found his own dynasty, Zhu named himself Duke of Wu in 1361, defeating his rival, Chen Yaolang, in 1363 at the Battle of Lake Poyang, one of the largest naval battles in world military history. On January 23, 1368, Zhu proclaimed the Ming Dynasty, meaning bright or radiant, naming himself Emperor Taizu, or the Grand Ancestor, posthumously renamed the Hongwu Emperor for his vast military achievements. As his support and popularity exploded across China, by 1352, China was once again unified under the Ming, while the Mongols were pushed north of the Great Wall, making the Red Turban Rebellion a redefining moment in China's long and turbulent history. The Great Wall of China. One of the few man-made objects that can be seen from outer space with the naked eye, the Great Wall of China is a series of fortifications that were built across the historical northern borders of ancient Chinese states and Imperial China, built as protection against various nomadic invaders from the Eurasian steppe. Several walls were built as early as the 7th century BCE, during the time of the Warring States period between the states of feudal lords. After Qin Shi Huang unified China from 220 to 206 BCE, the first emperor of China connected previously standalone walls into a unified defensive barrier. Today, little of the Qin Wall remains. However, many successive dynasties built multiple stretches of border walls, which reached its peak during the Ming Dynasty of 1368 to 1644, witnessing the construction of 5,500 miles of walls, trenches, and natural defensive barriers, such as hills and rivers. Beyond its role as a blockade against foreign invaders, the Great Wall also acted as a border control, which allowed for the imposition of duties on goods transported along the Silk Road. It also became a safe corridor for the transportation of goods, while imposing a physical barrier for the control and management of immigration and emigration. While portions north of Beijing have been preserved and extensively renovated, in many other locations the wall has fallen into disrepair. Over the intervening centuries since its original purpose, the wall has been a source for stone in the construction of houses and roads, while other parts of the wall have been defaced by taggers and vandals. A 2012 report by the National Cultural Heritage Administration indicates that 22% of the Ming Great Wall has disappeared, which equates to 1,219 miles of once majestic serpentine construction. The report further suggests that 37 miles of the wall in Gansu province may disappear over the next 20 years due to sandstone erosion. The Forbidden City. In the heart of modern Beijing stands the largest palace complex in the world, clocking in at 7.75 million square feet, or 50 times larger than Buckingham Palace. Built from 1406 to 1420, atop the site of Kublai Khan's once famous palace, the Forbidden City was ordered by the third Ming ruler, Emperor Zhou, after he moved China's capital from Nanjing in 1403. Constructed by some 100,000 artisans and forced laborers, the Forbidden City was home to 24 rulers, 14 from the Ming Dynasty and 10 from the Qing, reflecting rigid feng shui principles pointing to positive energy and the symmetrical balance of the universe. Incorporating 9,999 rooms, with an unmade 10,000th reserved for the celestial Lord of Heaven, Confucian ideology demanded that the emperor reside at a center point between north, south, east, and west, in a place known as the Hall of Supreme Harmony. In Chinese tradition, those of superior power were always located in the north facing south, elevated from commoners who always looked upwards into the north in reverent homage to their emperor. With his imperial quarters located at the northern end of the inner court, only women and eunuchs were allowed inside, granting audiences to ministers only in the southern parts of the outer court. Also under strict Chinese tradition, the emperor was considered to be the only formal inhabitant of the Forbidden City, while all others were viewed as mere visitors in the emperor's house. After China's long dynastic period came to an end in 1912, the Forbidden City has remained a popular tourist attraction, as well as an enduring reflection of China's often tumultuous 3,600-year history. The last Qing emperor, Puyi, lived in the Forbidden City until his 1924 expulsion by warlords and later a Nationalist Party official, while in 1949, Mao Zedong announced the founding of the People's Republic of China from atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace, before ordering Red Guards to post around the Forbidden City during the Cultural Revolution of 1966 until Mao's death a decade later. Named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, the Forbidden City has also been used as a movie set, including Hollywood's 1987 The Last Emperor, NBC's 1980s miniseries Marco Polo, and the Hong Kong wuxia comedy Forbidden City Cop in 1996, making the Forbidden City a lasting giant in Chinese history. The Qing Dynasty. After the Ming Dynasty army fell to Manchurian forces in 1616, Emperor Shun-Che established the Qin Dynasty in 1644, ushering in years of discrimination and beheadings against his Han subjects, passing the throne to his third son, Kangxi, who became the longest ruling emperor in China's long dynastic history. Ruling for 61 years, Kangxi created a standardized dictionary of the Han language, at the same time crushing all military and civilian uprisings that threatened his rule, while reducing taxes by stifling governmental excess and corruption. Beginning in 1735, Emperor Qianlong ruled with absolute mediocrity and disinterest for another 60 years, all at a time when conservative social mores worsened penalties for homosexuals, while men's insistence on sexual purity in women saw many widows commit suicide due to their unclean perception by heterosexual men. During the 19th century, the Qing dynasty came under repeated conflict with the West, including the Opium Wars of 1840 and 1856, which pitted a militarily weak China against the military dominance of Great Britain, who kept the illegal importation of opium pouring into Asia's largest nation, ultimately leading to widespread addiction among China's vast population. The 19th century Qing dynasty also saw multiple internal rebellions, including the White Lotus and Eight Tigrams rebellions, followed by the most deadly of all, the Taiping Rebellion of 1850, which led to the deaths of some 20 million Chinese. China's century of humiliation would end with the Boxer Rebellion of 1899, when bands of fed-up Chinese attempted to oust Christian missionaries and Western business interests from the country, which led to the Imperial Army's defeat by Western forces in 1901. After Emperor Xianfang died in 1861, the influence of his widow, Empress Dowager Cixi, heavily influenced the collapse of the Qing dynasty and indeed the end of China's dynastic history. Ruling as regent for 46 years after the revived China Society incubated in Hawaii and Hong Kong, intent on ending China's long history of monarchic rule, in 1911, the Nationalist Party of China began a revolt first in Wuchang, which spread to 15 provinces who sought independence from the Chinese Empire. After Cixi died in 1908, the final emperor, Xuantong, abdicated the throne in 1912, leading to the creation of the First Republic of China, making the Qing dynasty the last in China's long history of monarchic rule. The Boxer Rebellion. following the Opium Wars and the Sino-Japanese War of 1894, China's ruling Qing dynasty had been forced to accept broad foreign control by Western powers and Japan, and while China fought to resist these outside colonialists, the country suffered millions of casualties due to its lack of a modern military capable of warding off outside interests. In response to foreign oppression, a secret Chinese movement known as the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists began to attack foreigners, as well as local Chinese who had converted to Christianity. The group performed martial arts rituals under the belief that their daily calisthenics could ward off bullets and physical assaults, prompting Westerners to refer to them as shadow boxers, which led to the boxers' enduring nickname. Many boxers were peasants from famine and flood-ravaged Shandong province, who blamed the region's bad luck and poverty on their greedy Western overlords. When the Boxer Rebellion spread to Beijing in 1900, Boxers killed foreign diplomats and Christian missionaries, destroying churches, railroad stations, and private property. On June the 20th, the Boxers laid siege to Beijing's foreign district, prompting Qing Empress Dowager Cixi to declare war on all foreign countries with diplomatic ties to China. In response, an 8-nation force of some 20,000 troops fought their way across northern China, reaching Beijing on August 14th to formally crush the rebellion. Once the Boxer Rebellion was put down, conservative estimates placed the death toll at several hundred foreigners and several thousand Chinese Christians. The Boxer Rebellion officially ended with the signing of the Boxer Protocol on September 7, 1901, which called for the destruction of military fortifications surrounding Beijing, as well as formal punishment of government officials who took part in the uprising. Prohibited from importing arms for the next 2 years, China was forced to pay $333 million in reparations to the foreign powers that ended the rebellion, so weakening the Qing dynasty that it came to an end in 1912, after a second uprising in 1911. The United States and several other participating nations returned their portions of the reparations paid to them by China, on the condition that the funds would be used to create a university in Beijing. And there you have it, the history of China.